Welcome to Episode 2, Laying the Foundation. So far we really haven't done much. We've created an add-in and that's about it. So what I want to show you is what we're going to do in Lesson 2 by showing you the end of Lesson 2, and then we'll go back and work through this together. So I've got Visio open here, and if I go to File, Options, Add-ins, COM add-ins, we've got our Visio add-in loaded. And what you'll see now is we have a new ribbon item called My Cool Stuff. Very creative name, I know. We've got a couple group boxes on the ribbon. So let's start with seeing what we can do with what's been added. And this is very, very simple stuff. So if we click on button 2, did not intend to hit that breakpoint. Let's continue. We can see that on page 1, some shapes have been added, a square, a circle, and a triangle, and some new shapes which seemingly have the names of the pages in them. So my new page comes from my new page, so we must have created a new page. So let's go look at that. And my new page has two shapes on it. One says sheet.2 and one says sheet.1. Those are the names of the shapes that have been added. And just showing you that briefly, if we go to the developer part of the ribbon, you may have to turn that on if you don't already have it turned on. And we go to shape name, you can see that the name of this shape is called sheet.2. And then if we go back to My Cool Stuff, we have another ribbon group called Help, and if we click on Add-in Info, it tells us a little bit about the add-in we've created, which is just basically pulling information off the assembly attributes, and they're not very populated yet. And if we click on Developer Mode, it opens up a hidden ribbon group called Debug, and this enables us to see events that Visio fires, which can be very helpful when you're developing add-ins. So we're going to click on a watch window, which is a very simple Windows form, and we're going to click on display events. Let's get that watch window back here. And what I'm going to do is just drag this so we can see the watch window. In fact, you can already kind of see what's going on. The application activated and deactivated events are firing. The window changed event is fired. If we go back to Visio and click on new page, we've got some new page added being fired and some other events. If we click on chatty events, you can see all the events that get fired as you move your mouse around. So typically you won't be using that, but display events is very handy if you want to learn what Visio is doing when you interact with different things. So if we go back to page 1 and clear this out and click on the square and move the square, we see the selection changed event, and the formula in this shape has changed because we've moved it. So what we've done here is we've created a new ribbon called My Cool Stuff. We've added some functionality. Let me just show you one more thing. If we go to File, Print, you'll notice that down here on the bottom there's no footer. If we click on button 1 and we go back to File, Print, you can see that the name of the drawing and the date and page 1 of 3 has been added. So very simple functionality that we've been able to add by creating a ribbon called My Cool Stuff with a group 1, a debug, and a help section. Buttons add shapes, buttons add footers, actually in the opposite order, and then this developer mode hides a panel that'll be helpful to you as a developer, but typically you wouldn't be looking at very often, and we'll be talking about that more as we continue to develop our application. That's what we're going to build in Lesson 2. All right, let's go from an empty add-in to what we just saw. So I've added a new tag, and I've added a message box in the add-in startup method just to show that the add-in got started. So if we quickly run the Excel add-in, there's the message box. If we go to options, which you can see without creating a document, add-ins, com add-ins, there's our Excel add-in in the debug folder using the Excel add-in Visio file. Same thing if we ran the Visio one, we'd see the same thing. We'd see the message box and we're running the Visio add-in. So the first thing I want to do is I want to add a UI element to the add-in, which will allow us to invoke commands and do the other things we saw. So let's go to the Excel add-in, and I'm going to right-click, add, new item, and I'm going to add, I should show you the easier way to do this. Oops, if I could type, search for ribbon. We'll add a ribbon using the visual designer, call it ribbon 1. So now we have a ribbon in the Excel add-in, and if we open up the toolbox, view, toolbox, go to the, come back to the ribbon, go to the Office ribbon controls. Actually, let's not do that yet. Let's go ahead and run the add-in again. So we know the add-in's getting called because we saw the startup message. But it doesn't look like there's anything on the toolbar that reflects the new ribbon we created. What's going on there? Well, the reason there's nothing showing up is because the add-in's something smart enough to not show anything if there's nothing to show. So all we have is a tab with a group, but nothing's in the group. So let's go ahead and drag 2 buttons onto the group. Double click on the button. We've got a click event here. So let's just put a message box here. And now if we run the add-in, let's just go ahead and save the files. Add-in's getting called. Well, we still don't see anything. Well, what you need to do is you need to tell Excel that you've got a new version of the add-in. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our Excel output folder, bin debug. So add-ins, when they get created, of course, produce an assembly. There's the Excel add-in.dll, and it also produces a Visual Studio Tools for Office VSTO file that knows how to look in a associated manifest file for everything that is needed for that add-in. So to install an updated version of the add-in, we're just going to click on the VSTO file. And it says the current version is already installed. Well, what we have to do is we have to uninstall the previous version. Programs and features, find our Excel add-in, and you'll notice it's the one in bin debug, Excel add-in VSTO. We're going to remove it. We're going to come back here, install the updated version, go back, rerun it, get our startup message, open up a workbook. So now we do have a new ribbon element called add-ins. If we click on it, we've got 2 buttons, and if we click on button 1, there's our message button 1 click. So we've managed to add a ribbon, put a new tab on it, put 2 buttons into the group, and we've called some code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to the ribbon and show you a little bit more of what a ribbon is comprised of. So over here on this section of Visual Studio, I've got the add-in code loaded and the, what is that? Oh yeah, the project properties. So what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to double click on the ribbon we just added. And I'm going to put the designer over on this side. I'll try to keep Excel over on the left and Visio stuff on the right. So there's the designer. If you want to see the code behind, you can right click and say View Code. And we'll move that over here. And then the ribbon code also has automatically generated code behind in a designer file. So if we double click on that, and we'll move that over here. So the ribbon constructor calls initialize component, and initialize component's got all sorts of stuff in there to add the buttons and put them on the tabs. Normally you do not need to interact with the designer. There's an occasion where we will do something, but for right now we're not going to worry about that. In the ribbon, you get an automatic ribbon load event. You can put code there, and then when you double click on a control in the designer, the code will go into the code behind file. The other thing you can do is you can go to the button and open up my properties window. We can click on, let me pin that. We can click on events, and the only event supported by the button is a click event. We can browse for a event handler we already have, or we can double click there and it'll automatically create an event handler named whatever the name of the button is, and then click. So that's how easy it is to add some controls to the ribbon and put a little bit of code behind it. So now let's go ahead and drag on. We drag a new group on, and we're going to drag a third group on. So now I'm going to click on the group, and I'm going to come over to properties, and we're going to make this label debug. Click on group 3. We're going to name this help. And you don't need to do this, but I tend to, just because I like to have some idea when I'm in the code of what things are. And those of you that are as old as me may have heard of Hungarian notation. This is probably some version of that. So I'm going to call this group help. And we'll call this group debug. I'm not going to worry about the one that came with the add-in. And what we're going to do is we're going to drag 2 buttons onto the help. We'll call the first one display add-in info. I'm sorry, we'll change the label to display add-in info. And we will call this label this one toggle developer mode. Double click, we've got an event handler. I'm going to do the same thing that we just saw in the debug one. I'm going to drag on 2 buttons and 4 checkboxes, and then I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to go ahead and rename them so you don't have to watch me do all this typing. Click on each of the controls and come down and look at properties. You can see the changes I've made. I've changed the label to debug window, and I've called it button debug window. So I'm not going to click on each of these, but you can do that yourself. And then if you double click on one of these, you can see they all have event handlers, and instead of copying the name of the method down, I'm just using system reflection to get the current method name. So if we run the add-in now, there's our new tab, there's our stuff, and if we click on one of these, you can see something got called. So let's do one more thing. Let's go into the designer, and right now the label is tab add-ins. Let's call this my cool stuff, and instead of tab 1, let's call this tab my cool stuff. Why is it not letting me change that? Oh, I think, okay, that's fine. You can't change the default one, the one that comes with the initial ribbon. But what you can do, and we are going to be doing this in the future, is drag a new tab up, and then you can see here, if we change this to name tab my cool tab, it'll automatically change the control ID. So what I'm going to do, because this is kind of a useful thing to know, is we'll go back here, control click on these, control X to delete them, go to my cool stuff, add all the stuff there, and I don't know if we can remove this, but all our stuff's going to be on my cool stuff. And we'll just go back and call this tab add-ins the way it came. Now when we run our app, tab add-ins doesn't show up because there's no controls on it, but my cool stuff does show up, and you'll notice it's at the very end. I think tab add-ins normally appears somewhere here. If you right click on the ribbon, I think you might still, yeah, tab add-ins is still there, but because there's no controls, it doesn't display on the ribbon. But there's my cool stuff. We now have a ribbon with some controls on it. What I'd like to do is have debug window and watch window have a image that will show up next to the label, so it looks a little bit fancier. So in order to do that, this is not necessary, but let's try to keep things tidy. Let's go to the Excel add-in and add some folders. So I'm going to right click, add new folder, and I'm going to call this events. So I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to add some more folders, and then I'll show you the structure. So now we have an events folder, presentation folder, nothing in them, a resources folder with 3 subfolders. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into, well, actually, let's start with this. Let's take the ribbon and let's drag it into presentation. And it's just telling you it's going to take a little time to do this. Never seems to take much time, but it says that to you. And if we go back to the code behind, one thing that's important is that the ribbon has to be at the top level namespace of the add-in. If you created the folder and right-clicked and created the ribbon inside, the namespace would be Excel add-in.presentation, which is fine for most of the stuff we're going to do, but for the ribbon that can cause problems. So just remember that, and then when you have problems, you'll have to figure out what you learned. So I'm going to go back to the file system, and I'm going to add a few files to the images and icons folder that we'll use to put some interesting stuff on the button. So let me go get those. Okay, in the images folder, I put a couple GIFs, debug window GIF, watch window GIF, and in the icons folder, there's a couple icons. I don't think we're going to use the icons quite yet. So let's go back to Visual Studio. And if we right click on the icon folders, add existing item, resources, icons, let's add those 2 icons, come to the images folder and do the same thing. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the designer, and on the debug window, we're going to say show image is true. I'm going to click on image, local resource, import, and we'll pick debug window. And we'll do the same thing for the watch window. Show image true. Pick the image. And what import does is it adds it to the resources in the assembly, so you don't have to worry about managing files outside. So now we've got a nice little icon next to the windows, and if you ran it, you would see this in the UI. So now let's go take advantage of all the hard work we just put in and add it all to Visio. First, I'm going to save everything. Since I've already created the folders, I'm just going to go grab the ribbon, and I think I can just Control-C, Control-V. Well, that didn't work. Let's try that again. Control-C, Control-V. Well, that's not being very happy. Tell you what, let's just see if we can drag it down. There we go. Okay. Let's go Control-C, Control-V. Yeah, that worked. Control-C, Control-V. And if we come down here to the ribbon, double click on it, this is our Visio ribbon. And the same thing if we right click, there's the code, and we won't be needing the designer, but if we come up here, I'm sure I forgot something. Oh, what is it unhappy here? The name global. Oh, you see what happened? When I dragged it, it didn't update the namespace. So this is the Visio one. If I hover over the file, we're in the Visio add-in. So I'm going to do Control-Shift-F, replace in files. I'm going to replace Excel add-in with Visio add-in, and we want to do it just in the current project. Replace all. I have to come back and figure out why that's happening. Oh, yeah, why is that happening? Oh, that's, well, I think I tried to get too creative here. Excel add-in, Visio add-in, ribbon, Visio add-in, ribbon designer. Well, let's just try compiling this and see if we're happy. This ribbon connection does not gain a definition for get ribbon. Now, why do we have this ribbon collection? I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. And let's go look at the designer file. Well, maybe that's all we had to do. Okay, I think I've tried to get a little too clever here, so let's go back to the Visio add-in, delete the ribbon. In fact, let me go ahead and show you what I was talking about namespaces. So let's go add a new item, ribbon visual designer, click delete. We'll drag it over here so we know it's for the, oops. Yeah, that's fine. And if we view the code in the designer, you'll notice that the namespace is Visio add-in. It's not going to find that. So we'll go ahead and delete that. This, I'm pretty sure we can do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and I'm going to pick, well, actually, let's do this. Well, what happens if we really get creative and do Control-C on my cool stuff and come over here? All right, well, we got a lot luckier there. So we have my cool stuff, nothing on tabs add in. Let's see if we can rebuild everything and have everybody be happy. What I was trying to do is show you how you can copy things from one add-in to another and save yourself some time. It looks like everybody's happy. So if we go ahead and run the Visio add-in, I think the event handlers might not be there, but we can easily add those back. There's my cool stuff. Wait till Visio loads. Always a little bit slower when you're running in Visual Studio Debugger, so nothing, we don't have any event handlers, but we can easily remedy that. And as you can imagine, there are multiple ways you can get there. You can double click on each of these, or since we know what's going on and we really haven't done anything much, let's just go copy all the stuff we have over here, put those in. We have the code, but we don't have it wired up to the control. So if we come here and click button 1, events, button 1, click. So I'm not going to show you reconnecting all that, but you get the idea. So let me go do that and we'll continue. Okay, so now we have ribbons in both add-ins. We've got some controls with some default event handlers. Let's go ahead and commit this. Added ribbon and controls. All right, so now we're going to leave the Excel add-in as it is for right now. We'll come back to it, but let's go work primarily on the Visio add-in and add some functionality that's a little bit more interesting than just a message box. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close, well, actually we probably don't need to do that. Let's just drag this a little bit narrower and let's go into the code behind in the ribbon and let's start adding some code to do different things. So let's start with displayed add-in info. So let's Control-KC, comment out the message box. We'll create a new method called display add-in info. I use Code Rush, but you can certainly get there different ways. We'll declare a method. We'll put it right here. Display add-in info. And I've got an assembly that provides some support for creating add-ins. So vnc.visto add-in info.display info. So what we're going to need to do is go grab that assembly. So we'll come to References, Add to the solution. In fact, this is a good thing for us to do. So back in VNC Office, we'll just add the project for now. This is actually another good thing to learn, because what you can do is you can be working on multiple assemblies at the same time, and because you're using a project reference, you can just kind of bounce back and forth. So now we have VNC Visto add-in. Come here, add reference, projects, and we'll add VNC Visto add-in. All right. There we go. Okay, so now when we click on button display add-in info, it's going to call this method, which will display the add-in. And then the other thing we're going to do, we're going to control case C, comment that out, add a couple lines of code here to did I not rename ribbon group debug? Let's come here to the ribbon properties. Oh, it's not a group, it's a ribbon group. Oh, bother. That's the problem when you change your naming convention from your test code. So we'll just come back here and tidy this up. I'm going to hit pause for a sec. Okay, got the controls named back to what I wanted. So in VNC Visto common, VNC Visto add-in common, let's go look at that real quick. There is a little bit of code in a class called common, all static stuff. One Boolean is developer mode, enable logging. Anyway, you can come back and look through here. There's static variables for the debug window, which will create a new one when you click on it, so we'll get a little bit ahead of ourselves. But there's some code behind. So the nice thing is, instead of having to put this code in all the add-ins you create, you typically use it all the time. So we'll just have it back in this add-in common file. So we're basically just setting developer mode to, we're negating whatever it's currently set to. That's just going to toggle it back and forth. And we're making that ribbon group visible or not. And then the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to the add-in, and let's comment it out. We don't need to see this message every time the add-in starts up. I mean, it's useful if you've created a problem, but we know it's working so far. So what we're going to do is add a little code here. So I've added some code here to do a couple things, one which you haven't fully done yet. We're calling a method called initialize ribbon in the add-in startup, and what it does is it just sets some of the variables to what we want them to be, and then it also goes and creates a Visio app events, which we need to do next. So before we can do that, we need to add a place for things that we want globally available in the add-in. I typically call that common.cs. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add, and we'll just add a new class. We'll just call that common.cs. And we're going to derive from vnc.vistoaddin.common. And we're going to add a little bit of code. And we don't have this events yet, so let's hold off on that. So now, with a little bit of luck, oh boy, compile errors, how can that be? Common doesn't have a definition for app events. Well, I'll tell you what, let's just comment this out for a sec and run it. We don't see the debug group. So if we toggle developer mode, it expands the debug group, making all these controls visible. And these, of course, continue to display the default message boxes. If we click on display add-in info, it shows the information that's in the assembly.cs file. And right now we didn't populate very much of that. But anyway, this way you know what version of your add-in is running. So let's go back to Visual Studio. Okay, I've cheated a little bit. I put a file in the events folder on the file system. So I'm going to add an existing item, Visio app events, and instead of typing all this in, all this is a class file. I thought it'd make more sense to just kind of walk you through it than type all this in. So let me collapse this I think Control M, Control O, there we go. So what we've got is more stuff than you need to see right now, but let's just look at the event part. So there's a new class, Visio app events. We've created a new application object called Visio application. So we'll be using that down below. Initialize this somewhere else. If there is a Visio application, we add event handlers for all the different events that Visio can fire. And this list is going to vary depending on what version of Visio you're running, but I think I'm running maybe 2021, 2019, I'm not sure. And what it's going to do is it's going to call, and this code is all down below, after modal event is going to call this method. And if we go look at it, it does very little. It calls display and watch window a counter that gets incremented every time this event fires, and it's just going to tell you the name of the current method. So all these event handlers basically don't do anything other than just display into the watch window that the method occurred and what the count of times it's been called. And you'll see how we're going to use that in just a minute. There's a whole bunch of events that we just log, and then chatty events. If the checkbox display chatty events is true, then we're going to display it. Otherwise, we just bump up the count, because you'll see some of these methods get called a lot. So if we come back to the add-in, we should be able to now, I know I'm going about this in a very confusing way. If we come back to the ribbon, if we come back to common, now if we go to the add-in, so if common has app events, enable app events, I think that's has app events, is enabled, then if we don't have app events set, we go create a new Visio app events class, which we just saw, and we set the Visio application to globals this add-in application. This is something the VSTO tools give you for free, so you can always access the current application. I've just chosen to put it, instead of having to type globals this add-in application, which you certainly can do. I've just got a property called Visio application in the common class. So now we toggle developer mode, debug window. So what we want to do is we want to put something in, we want to launch the watch window. So let's comment this out. So let's go create a method, display watch window. We're going to set the watch window to visible. In VNC VSTO add-in, there are two forms, form debug window and form watch window. And they're simple Windows controls, really nothing fancy here. And I put them in the VSTO add-in assembly so you don't have to be creating these for each of the add-ins. They're just kind of handy things to have around. Okay, I've gone ahead and typed some code in to the different methods we already had. I took out the message boxes. So displaying the debug window toggles the visible state of the window. Enabling app events, when the checkbox is checked, it sets the common. If we run the Visio add-in now, toggle developer mode, get the watch window displaying. It's like Visio off to the side here. We click on display events, and we're going to go create a new page. And now we see all the events that Visio fired when we added a new page, many of which you may not use, but there's page added. If we go add another page, same thing, so bump the count of how many times page added has been called. If we turn on, well, here I'm just going to go pick page 2, and so the view changed. If we turn on chatty events, you can see all the events that are happening as we move the mouse around, which is why we typically don't use chatty events. So being able to see, you can clear the window, being able to see the events that Visio is firing when different things happen can be very handy when you're trying to figure out how you want to automate some things. Sometimes you want to grab an event handler and put some code behind there. So that's why we took the time to create support for all the Visio events and give you the ability to look at it. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add some functionality behind these buttons to actually put some stuff on the Visio pages. And then I think we're going to be complete with this lesson, which is added a ribbon, added functionality to let you view Visio events hidden behind a developer mode ribbon toggle, and then we're going to go actually do some creation of shapes next. So hang on. So before we go add the new code, let's just tidy up this file a little bit. So these are the debug event handlers. I think we've got some couple more. Okay, so I think we've got, whoops. I think we've got those taken care of. This is the stuff the help thing does. It toggles the state of the developer mode group. All right, so let's make it a little bit easier to see what we're doing here. So in button 1, and we're going to take all this code out later, but in button 1, let's add a new method called add shape to new page. And in button 2, let's create a method add footer. Let's go add a using statement here. Microsoft Office interrupt Visio, and I'll just alias that to Visio. And let's just do one more thing. So this is a little bit more friendly. Add shapes. Add page and shapes, and we'll call this one add footer. Let's go run this again. Okay, so right now we have one page in Visio. We come to My Cool Stuff. We click on Add Page and Shapes. So we have a new page called My New Page, and it has two shapes on it. Looks like the shape is a rectangle, and if you go to the developer ribbon, and you click on Shape Name Sheet 2, so it looks like the shape has been set to the name of the shape itself, which is the second shape on the sheet. I'm going to learn a lot more about that in the future. And then on page 1, we've added a square, a circle, and a triangle, which came from basic shapes, just basically the same as dragging this on and then typing in square. We did that in code, so we added 3 shapes by using stencils, and then we also created 2 more shapes and set those to be the name of the new page and the existing page. So let's go see how that was accomplished in the code. In fact, let's just go back to the code. Okay, no, we didn't do add footer yet. So if we look at add shape to new page, the first thing we do is we get the Visio application object. And I noticed that I got it from globals. You can also get this from common application. And from the application object, we get the active document. And from the application object, we get the active page. So we set the active page to the variable called current page. We add to the pages collection using the add method to create a new page. So there's the new page. We open up the basic_u Visio stencil, and I think I might have a folder here. Yeah, Office, Root, Office 16, Visio content. Here are all the stencils that Visio ships with, so I've just come in here and I scroll down. My, there's a lot of them. Actually, it may throw some you add in here too, but there's basic, M for metric, basic U for universal units. So I've just gotten the name of the stencil, I've opened up the stencil, and then we've dropped onto the current page from stencil masters, the square master, the circle master, and the rest of the parameters tell you where to place it. We set the text in those shapes to the name of the master, and we've set the name of the new page to My New Page, and to the current page and the new page we've drawn rectangles. That's the same as going to the toolbar and drawing a rectangle, and these are the coordinates of the rectangle, and we set the shapes to the different page names. I'll show you the code now and then we'll demo it. This is how you can add a footer. Instead of having to go file, print, header, footer, you can add a footer to the document. So if we come back to Visio and we click on File, Print, you'll notice there's no footer here. And if you click on Edit Header and Footer, nothing is set there. But if we come back and click on My Cool Stuff, Add Footer, and then go back, you'll see that we now have a footer set to the name of the drawing and the date and page 1 of 2. So that's kind of a whirlwind tour. A little bit of a rough crossing, I'm sorry for that, of adding a ribbon, some ribbon functionality to enable different parts of the ribbon to show up, launching debug windows to let you look at events that are being fired, and then calling functionality to push Visio around. So that is kind of a starting point to creating your own add-ins and doing things that you want to do with Visio. Support Tools Visio is really just a tremendous amount of just more of this. So the next thing we're going to do is, instead of having to go through all this work to create an initial add-in, we're going to learn how to save all our work as a Visual Studio template, which will give us a leg up on creating the next add-in we want. Thanks for watching.